Alrighty. Limbus Company is a game I've spent way too many hours on. Considering I started during the original run of Murder on the Warp Express and have already amassed 600 hours on a gacha game that really shouldn't need anywhere near that much attention, I think it's safe to say I was an addict at some point. What in the living hell was I addicted to in this game? A well-presented story with glorious world building and well-paced characterization? Well, not exactly. Most people play that once, maybe a second time during a BOGA, and anyone who has read the source material of any of the characters will probably scream at you for calling it a good adaptation. That's me. I'm that guy when it comes to Canto 6 and Wuthering Heights. Anyway, I'm not here to talk about reading comprehension in the traditional sense, but instead to cover how it factors into team building, mostly in the sense of cognitive load. First off, we'll be bringing back the Yucca and demonstrating an odd little theorem. I'll tell you a few things you need to track. You let me know down in the comments below how many you were able to keep up with. To this end, I'm going to use Blackjack as an example. The rules are simple. I deal you 2 cards and 1 card to myself. You win if you have more points than me and don't go over 21, resulting in a bust. You can take a card on your turn by hitting the table, or swipe to stand your cards. Once all players have had their turn, I draw cards up to 16 and stand on 17. If you have a higher points total, you win. If I bust, you win. If you get blackjack, an ace, and 10, jack, queen, or king, and I cannot, you win. All of that is the basic rules of the game. Consider that one thing to actively track. Next thing to track is the points value of your hand. Add the value of the 2 cards you're looking at for that total. That makes 2 things to track. Third thing to track is the dealer's card point value. Comparing the aforementioned 2 can inform whether or not to hit or stand. That judgment itself could be a 4th thing to track even. Whose turn is it at a given moment? You're the only player, just keep that in mind as a 5th thing. And how much did you bet this turn? How many chips did you actually have left? Actually, how much did you even buy in for? That's 3 more things to keep track of, huh? 8 total, just to play blackjack at a casino table. Not the worst I've seen. How many did you actually get though? Well, in Limbus, you'd press the funny win rate button and go next, right? Single thing to track. Don't have to give a damn, just P and enter. Unfortunately, more than Enkephalon is at risk at a blackjack table. You'd want to look at ways of reducing the casino edge. Okay, what if we start card counting? There's only 1 deck of cards, we should be able to keep the count of 1 up and 1 down, right? Heck, if it doesn't reshuffle, we might have a perfect count to work with. Okay, well, that's another load, isn't it? What if I introduced other players at the table, and their action, their bets, their hand signals, heck, even their faces? Even more load. Okay? What if the cards are permanently being reshuffled and every round is functionally new? Well, no more counting, I suppose, but you'd have other issues now. What's the point of all this? What in the fuck does blackjack have to do with my team building philosophy? The theory of 7 plus minus 2. Short-term cognitive load. Knowing this is the difference between whether or not you're allowed to just press that win rate button and call it a day. The difference between me sending a mate P-enter from my mouse macros or actually paying attention to my bloody sinners, crying out in pain and about to get a fell bullet to the face because I didn't account for the ideal amount of core memory. The theory is proposed by George Miller out there. Don't think it's the Mad Max creator, but anyway. The theory proposed states that the average human being can only keep around 7 things in short-term memory. These are things we would need to keep track of actively while performing whatever tasks are in front of us. In the case of blackjack, the number of things to actively keep track of is potentially so overwhelming that the casino keeps this in mind to exploit the customers and make them play more freely than they realistically have reason to, spending more money and fuss time on the premises. Due to their lack of understanding the real functions of the game, alongside the addictive nature of gambling, players are slowly milked for cash in their wallets. I would rather you not be that, so at the very least, let me tell you how to reduce cognitive load and make more informed decisions when putting together a team in Limbus, saving you shards, pools, leveling tickets, and threads among other things. At the end of the video, we'll bring back the mat and I'll give you a brief on how you can reduce blackjack's cognitive load too, maybe as a party trick of sorts. Don't actually go into a casino to test it out, trust me, the house always wins, and I've done both the math and the hours to advise you on that. Far more hours than I've spent on Limbus anyway. Around quadruple, I reckon. Limbus has a lot to keep track of during combat encounters. Project Moon has done its best to condense everything into as readable a UI as possible. Let's start simple. At the base, you gotta keep track of HP and sanity, dagger thresholds, speed, status effects, skill buckets, enemy skills, coins in their power, offense/defense level, flashing, skill sin affinities, skill targeting, skill conditionals, sinner passives and supports, sinner backup order, turn count, waves/enemies, ego resources, resistances, both sin and damage type, and that's all without ego gifts. Or other sorts of buffs, or even the Durante button up there. Okay, let's take a deep breath and consider just how many of these actually matter while playing Limbus. Oh, what's that? All of them. Yes, all of them bloody matter. But thankfully, the computer does most of the work, and you can hit P, enter, right? Well, about that. Even the computer isn't that good at calculating everything. When things change, the moment clashes go right or wrong, special effects and passives trigger, bosses phasing, things not going entirely as planned, prompting improvisation, and a whole host of other considerations. So what can we do to reduce the cognitive load? There's a few approaches available. The most popular is to let the computer do its thing. You're a Project Moon fan. You don't read. You've probably got this video on a second monitor. Why should you start reading now, when a random 27-year-old on the internet tells you to do so? Okay, sure. Cuts your cognitive load down to just one. Pressing that win rate button and the enter button. Letting sparks fly, clashes go awry, and death and despair to ensue. This is like betting it all on red and leaving your fate in the hands of an entirely rigged game of roulette. Not the best. Alright, what if we actually want to play the game well? We can pick through each of those aforementioned pieces bit by bit and tackle it piecemeal. Check HP and sanity, see if you're almost staggered, take a look at relevant statuses, check what skills you have and the upcoming ones, target enemy skills after evaluating whether or not clashes are favorable, or if passives come into play as you'd expect them to. Bank on fighting to resistances and making informed plays, the route expected of a player that understands the game. But, that takes so much bloody time and we're not in the library anymore. Not everything needs to be considered, right? You're not trying to do a perfect run. Just clear or even do your dailies. It isn't that deep. You still want to hit that win rate button, don't you? Even if the above method lets you tackle things in such a way that your grandmother would probably clear all the way to the latest content. You think you're better than that. Heck, you think your team should be capable of so much more with so much less. You know what? Let's tackle it from that angle. What does it take to reduce the cognitive load during combat to its absolute minimum? Building your team around the win rate button and automatic play. Well, first off, you've got to go from being a player to a planner. Time to think. Think of all the ways we can reduce that laundry list and leave space for eating crayons while we do it. First, we're not necessarily picking a status, but if we had to, we would be picking one of the more self-sufficient or self-sustaining ones. Like charge. God, I hate charge. Or poise, which is just thinly veiled charge gambling. Those two could not care less about count on enemies, and with newer IDs, have more than enough ways to sustain themselves. Compared to the others, Tremor needs a lot of setup for high returns, Bleed is both count and blood face reliant, Sinking requires you to pay attention to counts, likewise with Rupture. Burn is an exception here, but since it is applied to enemies, we can't guarantee it all of the time compared to Poison Charge, which don't necessarily reset upon killing something. Now, I'm not really an enjoyer of either of these statuses. I'm kind of a Tremor guy and have been since picking up this game by some miracle. That being said, we no longer have to keep track of count quite as aggressively, nor the states of our enemies. Most things build up the two statuses just for using them, leaving us to cut the idea of status out of our minds for the most part, depending on what kind of IDs we then choose to pick. For the sake of this example, let's say we want to go with Poise. How well does Poise do with its skills out the gates? We need to care about SP gain problems, clashing issues, coin power, damage types. What about passives, conditionals, ego resources? Well, first off, if we're taking the Poise route, we've got to mostly rely on Pride for damage and resources. At most, we've got to power 1 or 2 egos to make things smoother, otherwise the rest of the IDs available in the status are quite simple to use and don't require all too much micromanagement. That being said, not quite filled a full roster without having to work around some gimmicks, so let's instead forget about said gimmicks, period, and work in some charge IDs. I hate to say it, but a good chunk of the IDs I'd think of for brain-off gameplay all revolve around well PP. They're kinda just the best for this sort of thing due to their power level as well as their, for the most part, set and forget nature. This means a team of the previous WoW PP identities will likely let you turn your brain off due to how hard they need to sell the damn events. Consider it the power of money, fueled by aura and hype moments. Bloody hate it, but what can you do? To this end, my brain off lineup may look something like this. On the field, the full stop boys, Mao Faust, both the magical girls, Red Eyes and Penitence Roshu, Sinclair, and in reserve, BL Sang, Rhino Man, Captain Nish, BO Otis, and Pirate Greg. Outside of the WoW PP IDs, a good chunk of these are readily available for sharding, or likely to come home as you go about rolling at random. As far as I'm concerned though, this team reduces the cognitive load dramatically, down to pressing the win rate button. All of their mechanics are basically automatic and quite reliable. At most, you'd be looking to use a counter on Rodya, but otherwise, everything else plays itself. The ideal move at almost all times is going to be hit the win rate button, and profit. However, I have a nickname for this kind of gameplay. For the win raters in general. I like calling them woodpeckers. They press maybe 1 or 2 buttons at a time and let the pretty lights and effects do their job. You can zone out, space out, and You can zone out, you can space out, and your grandma can do it too. What am I alluding to, huh? Well, you're no better than someone who plays with a slot machine if you decide to engage in this kind of team building. You aren't playing for the sake of the game anymore. You are likely just addicted to seeing big number go up or any semblance of numbers at all. There is no satisfaction in reaching the conclusion I have with this team, because realistically speaking, most other teams can hit it with a little more tweaking and better cohesion. This team is boring. Extremely boring. When your cognitive load hits an all-time low while playing a game, you should instead ask yourself why you're playing at all. If you're grinding for the sake of grinding, I implore you to look in the mirror and ask yourself if you're having fun. Are you intrinsically motivated to play this game, or are you extrinsically motivated? Are you playing just for the rewards and external acclaim, or are you here because you actually want to make a well-oiled machine of a team? Phew, that got a little dark. That tends to happen in my old line of work. You see the best and worst in people daily. The highest the highs, lowest the lows. That being said, for the intrinsically motivated individuals left watching, let me talk about how I prefer to build teams. When it comes to cognitive load, I am for the most part going to disregard it now. Or if you've made it this far in the video without falling asleep or feeling particularly offended, then you are the sorts that would love what I've got brewing here. In that case, like the video and subscribe. I'm in between jobs at the moment and could use a little leg up if you don't mind. Those who are here for the love of the game rather than optimization, let's talk about deck building, since for all intents and purposes, we're building a 12 to 60 card deck. First off, when picking a team, there are archetypes. In Limbus's case, there is status teams, faction teams, damage type teams, and Exodia style teams for the most part. There are of course meme and gimmicky teams, but those can usually be attributed to the aforementioned consequently. Start then, we are going to want a basis. Are we building a status team? Bleed, sinking, tremor, poise, charge, rupture, etc. Are we perhaps going for a bunch of fixers, sevens, sinks, lose? Or heck, we're picking a single favorite ID and playing all of our eggs in one basket to max out their potential. In this particular case, let's go with the road less beaten. Let me show you what I currently enjoy running in Tremor. Our basis is twofold. We're here to soup up Regret Faust as much as possible, while getting the benefits of the status as a sideline. Plus, we want to look into her gimmick more extensively. Regret Faust's main appeal is the ability to gain attack weights on her S2 and S3 based on her current Tremor count. This gives us a soft conditional we need to meet in order to make proper use of her kit. By default, her S1 gives her 6 count, regardless of whether she won the clash or lost it. She does need to use it, however. Unfortunately, this S1 is pretty terrible otherwise. It does, however, guarantee that we meet her attack weight conditionals on the following turn without any extra requirements. The same can be said of her defensive skill, where so long as it gets used, she gains 6 Tremor count. Tremor count, of course, reduces by 1 at the end of turn. Very important detail to keep in mind, especially in regards to her S2. Her S2 does not allow her by normal means to loop the added attack weight. This is due to giving her only 4 Tremor counts on use, and an additional count if she hits heads on her first coin, totaling 5 and losing 1. But then only have 4 Tremor counts on the turn after, using her S2. Her S3 is even greedier by all accounts, only gaining Tremor counts when she manages to score a kill with it. At that, it is only 2 Tremor counts. However, this S3 can gain up to 2 more attack weights by consuming 10 Tremor counts. Plus, we want to increase her tremor count as fast as possible, but through vanilla means and without the support of the rest of her team or ego passives, this is less than ideal. So with the star of our team being Regret Faust, let us see what tools we can apply. Here we can consider a few things. In deck building terms, our options here are staples, support, packages, and techs. These come with the territory of the archetypes, but also may have some unique considerations depending on what we're going for. Since our aim is quite unusual considering the age of this ID and its needs, we should prioritize those first. We want anything that can increase our tremor count faster. Adding more tremor counts or finding more sources of it is our ideal. Thankfully, they exist and are rather simple to implement in this archetype. Support passives are the first place to look. My first and most immediate consideration is unironically. The AI applies an additional tremor count to self upon using skills or coin effects that would grant it, up to twice per turn to the ID in the number 1 deployment slot. Since Faust is our star player, she will keep that slot to herself. Condition for fueling this passive is 4 sloth, of which in a tremor team should be exceedingly easy to attain. Next is Molar Otis. This one is a bit contentious, as in the same slot we also have T-Corp Otis, and both Molar and her are rather good IDs to field and tremor, both having rather strong arguments to be used as staples. However, I'm not an Otis fan to begin with, sorry, and our star is still Faust. Molar Otis will ride the bench as support and provide more tremor count to an ally with the most tremor count for only 3 sloth, and we'll be keeping it that way. From there, let me introduce the 3 other supporting IDs this time round. Spicebush Yisung gives us 10% more AoE damage, as long as we manage to fit it in a free res sloth chain. It shouldn't be too difficult considering the lineup I have planned. Rodya has 2 options here depending on whether we're expecting to win or lose more. T-Corp Rodya helps us win clashes against targets with tremor, but also requires us to have free sloth res like Spice Sang. While this benefits the team in general, we're here for Faust. So we're going a Rose Spanner. For 4 Pride, we can increase the amount of stagger threshold raised by 20% should the ID triggering a tremor burst be the slowest. So how do we guarantee that, eh? Well, we have a couple of ways of manipulating speed, but most notably, this plays into Regret Faust's passive. The second half of it rather, Mental Corruption. While we almost never want to trigger this, it does give us a blunt power up and bind, coupled with a lower speed range, should place her comfortably in the last slot. Utilizing the stagger threshold raise with Rodya's passive on her S3, we can potentially output quite a bit of fixed damage if some stars align. And with Faust here being our star, that could happen if we rig the deck a little with egos later. Finally, and probably most jank, is going to be Eurodivi Honglu. You see, we can't afford to let him fuck with our count build up, so we're benching him. The free sloth res extra tremor burst chance is an okay enough passive, but realistically, it won't go off that often. However, we could just slot some other generic more useful ID in there, like his base ID or Ting Tang. For insurance though, I'll be leaving him as Eurodivi in case he does need to come in and pull some weight. All that covers the support section, so let's cover the remaining staples. We're going to want to field T-Corp Don for Time Moratorium. While at times it may not be the best thing to come out of her due to delaying encounters or staggers or quite a few other useful things, having the potential to line up a damage amp turn would be nice to have, as it also counts as having another negative effect. We do get some benefit out of it from the Regret Faust passive, that of which favors having more debuffs on the enemy to reduce their clash power against Faust. Amplitude Conversion Chain also can be pretty handy, provided we need to clash harder for whatever reason. That being said, as an ID, T-Corp Don is growing less favorable, but can still clash pretty reliably under the effects of Borrowed Time. An odd pick here is going to be Ufi Heathcliff. Okay, I know not a lot of people like making use of him, however I do, and Asymmetrical Inertia is a fun ego to get going. It also provides access to some more debuffs and ego resource generation variety, most notably Envy and Gloom. We can also make use of binds if it's really required as well. Nonetheless, having him here is nice for our counts once clock winding gets going. Next up, we've got Ishmael. Now there's something here that makes her particularly essential to our usage case, that being Christmas Nightmare's ego passive. This ego passive allows us to fuel forced attack weights even more should we manage to trigger it, giving us 2 more counts per turn, up to 4 should the stars align a very specific way. Now the contention here is which ID to run between Hanafuda and Zwei. On one end, Zwei Ishmael is an insane ID with no strings attached to it, requires a bit of setup and has a reliable way to nuke out damage as well as profit from Rodya's support passive. But it pains me to say that Zwei Ishmael can sabotage our operations here, due to also being tremor counts hungry. She can immediately jack herself up to 10 counts and then just suck away the gain from Otis's passive, cutting one of our Faust engines away. If the encounter is particularly hard, or if we can eventually eclipse her gains, then perhaps we can make use of her. But if we just want to rely on Faust, we should instead throw in Hanafuda Ishmael, the boogeyman that has haunted me at night, because goddamn that video has left containment, and opened a Pandora's box I can no longer close. Please send help. At least put me in contact with others like me. That would be appreciated. Anyhow, I'd reckon that covers staples and supports for this build. Let's talk about the package I am proposing as an alternative condition for winning, and to give us a damaging source of tremor burst. I'd like to add in the fun package, both Massault and Sinclair. Having both makes the application of Tremor Scorch far more consistent, allowing for some semblance of damage to be dealt through the status aside from its usual effects. The two of them also give us a long-term game plan, having Massault become something of a monster as he chews through bullets, and eventually through a few ego resources to soup him up beyond measure. All the egos I plan to use here are quite insane with Massault, and thus his inclusion as a fielded ID is a no-brainer. On top of that, it provides access to more useful ego resources, and of course burn, another negative status effect to add. We've got more fuel for force passive to boot, basically. With Claire also refilling his bullets, the two should make a rather strong powerhouse as fights go on and on. Last but not least, allow me to introduce our tech option of choice, Fire Fist Gregor. First off, he's not a Tremor ID, he isn't going to eat into our counts. However, he provides a nice stim of burn count, which allows us to propel the reach of Scorch beyond Eternal 2. He also happens to provide us with some sweet gloom for his defensive skill as required. Alternatively, we can make use of Alan Gregor, which is a far more greedy choice. It provides us access to two more status effects in the form of Bleed and Open/Deep Wound. Maybe a little on the overkill side, as we already have access to Tremor, Burn, Sinking, Defense Down, Time Moratorium, Bind, Offense Level Down, and plus Coin Drop. The sheer deluge of which being a little much, it does however mean that a lot of ego gifts in MD will see some form of use or another. For the sake of this build though, I'll be going with Fire Fist for that consistency outside of MD. Anyhow, this may not be the burstiest build. It isn't even the most meta build for Tremor by any stretch of the imagination. However, it does find room as a way of clearing chaff for Tremor and exploiting the ever-living hell out of Faust's attack weight. Almost every part of the team plugs itself either into Faust or something that will eventually plug back into Faust. With that glimpse into my team building philosophy, I suppose you can call me a nerd for even trying that hard to put all of this together. But I rather enjoy watching Faust slam things with a hammer. There's a certain irony to it. That and this team makes use of a lot of my favorite ideas in the game now, which all happen to be able to fuel this team idea. To summarize, come up with an idea or pick an archetype. Pick your favorite sinner or ID or whatever floats your boats. Figure out the staples, decide on a few packages that could be airdropped in for your ideal composition, and polish it all out with supports and techs. Following all that, I'd imagine most of you could find ways of creating really fun teams that don't just revolve around slamming all the newest IDs into a team and calling it a day. The supports read the passives, what they provide, how difficult they are to fulfill by your on-field IDs. Figure not just what it does, but the implications it has on how the rest of the team plays. You shouldn't just be reading. Go apply some comprehension while you're at it. What does it enable? What jank are you allowed to get away with in its implementation? How much can you warp on-field IDs to its condition? As for staples, there are IDs and egos that have far higher power budget than others. There are some that also link directly with others to topple and surmount that power level, so long as they're all together. These combos are staples and should most often be designed around. Think Blood Fiends or the Hay Shows. Heck, you could even consider the Blade lineage in that regard. Past there, consider your packages. Off the top of my head, I enjoy the Fun package, Full Stop package, N-Corp Duo, the Quad Trio, and the Middle. They're all fun to airdrop in as the team allows. Finally, consider techs to either enhance your existing staples and packages, or otherwise hard counter specific encounters. While I don't have a comprehensive list of these, there are a lot of 1ID solutions to some of the hardest fights in the game, or bandage solutions for the idea you are trying to execute upon. These something like Kurokuma Hongers to take on Bamboo Hatted Kim, for example. Anyhow, I did say I'd teach you a bit about blackjack earlier in the video. I lied. Just don't fucking gamble, alright? If you have to, follow the chart, but know that the house always wins, and I was in the kennel doing their dirty work.